I wish I could describe to you the brokenness that I felt after going through a divorce. Words like guilt and shame just don't do it justice. Irredeemable, damaged goods, those come a little closer. It was shortly after my divorce when I found myself out on a date, trying my best to ignore the hole I felt in my heart, wanting to cover the wounds of my soul with the touch of a strange woman. I was actively trying to ignore the Holy Spirit, trying to keep him on the back burner where I had placed him. I wanted one thing that night, and it wasn't to be bothered by the God whom I'd felt completely and utterly abandoned by during my failed marriage. Her offer came shortly after the check. So, I can meet you back at your place if you want. This was the moment I'd been building up to, toying with in my mind for longer than I'd care to admit. This was it. After years of neglect and unrequited attempts of affection with my ex, I was finally going to get some. Except I couldn't. It was like bam, in an instant, all the temptation was gone, and I knew I just couldn't go through with it. I struggled to describe it. I felt like I saw a picture of what would happen to my soul if I did. It'd crumple up like a sheet of scrap paper, be thrown into a dark chest, locked up, the key forgotten. I told the girl I just wasn't feeling it, and awkwardly walked away. As I did, I felt like I was in shock, like you do after a near miss with death. And I also was kind of honestly pretty annoyed. I saw a picture in my head of me walking through a thick fog towards a cliff, getting 1 foot out over the edge, and having someone grab me by the back of the neck and pull me back. It was a very visceral experience. I knew it was the Lord prompting me, and I was really just kind of irritated he wouldn't just leave me alone. But that was just act one. We're not to the turning point yet. I was still annoyed with God, still full of questions as to why my marriage had failed, and not too keen on returning to him. But over the next several weeks, I felt his beckoning. A friend suggested I check out a certain church that weekend. I felt uneasy about returning. There's this line in Psalm 23 that says, "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Years ago, a friend pointed out how odd this line is. There's very little that's comforting about a shepherd's staff. He uses it to hook around a sheep's neck and pull it back into the fold. And it dawned on me, that's exactly what happened during that night a few weeks prior. So Sunday morning rolls around. I go to church. I definitely felt awkward being there, freshly single, alone, feeling like I was sticking out like a sore thumb. And apparently I looked it too, since during the welcome period, a woman around my mom's age came up and started to chat with me. It was precisely the kind of conversation I didn't want to be having. She's being very kind and intentional, but really I just wanted to be left alone. After what felt like a half hour, but was probably about 3 minutes, the welcome time ended and the sermon began. Much to my surprise, the sermon that morning was about Jesus' statement, "I am the good shepherd." At the end of the service, I somehow found myself chatting again with a lady and her husband. It didn't take long for my recent divorce to come up, nor for them to invite me to this super secret men's retreat weekend that was happening in a few weeks. When I asked them for more details, they were very opaque, refusing to give any, and saying I just need to be open to the experience. I was obviously very skeptical. The lady gave me her card, and I said I'd pray about it. I was at a sports bar with a few buddies the next night, telling them this story, sharing my skepticism, when I kid you not, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shepherd flash onto the screen. By the time my eyes moved to see it on the screen, he was gone. It was so fast I couldn't be sure that I actually saw it. I told the guys, I think I just saw a shepherd on that screen, and they all rolled their eyes at me. I went home and found the commercial just to make sure I wasn't insane. God was certainly grabbing my attention, and I decided to go on the retreat weekend. I soon found out that I wasn't allowed to bring my cell phone, I couldn't bring my wallet, and I wasn't even allowed to drive myself. The nice crazy lady from church was going to drive me. I thought to myself, yup, that seems a little insane, but I might have seen an old dude's face on a TV screen, so I guess we're all good, right? I can't tell you a lot of details about the weekend other than that it was an incredibly intimate time with the Lord. He placed men on the weekend who spoke life into my soul. He removed the burden of my guilt and shame from the divorce as I literally nailed my sins to the cross. And he revealed himself as my good father in tangible ways that I can't fully explain. As the nice church lady dropped me back off at home after the weekend, she handed me a gift bag and told me to open it when I was ready. After getting ready for bed, I remembered about the gift. It was a devotional. In all honesty, I rolled my eyes and almost didn't look at it. But I had a very distinct thought. You're being an asshole right now. So I decided to see what that day's entry was at least. I flipped through and found that day, February 26th. The entry was entitled, Life with the Good Shepherd. I completely lost it. I was in utter awe and felt so completely loved and pursued by God in that moment. I could have made so much of this up, fitting details to meet a narrative I was building to make myself feel better. But this last element was too much. I mean, the devotional was published in 1998. I checked. As one of my favorite authors puts it, all the beauty of this world is meant as a set of hints, of conspiratorial whispers, of clues and suggestions and flickers of light, all nudging us into believing that behind the beautiful world is not random chance, but a loving God. It was all too much. I was being wooed into believing that I serve a God of second and third and 100th chances, and that he had found me, was calling me back into his flock, redeeming my past, and making all things new.
For me, the story begins the summer of 2016. I was what some would consider successful. I was graduating with an MBA from Northwestern University, and in theory, there was a world of opportunity open to me. But there were other kinds of successes that I longed for, to be a wife and mother, mostly. I never imagined I would be 28 and single, but God hadn't given me a choice about grad school. It was clear to me on several occasions that dropping out wasn't an option if I was to be obedient. So my time was spent studying and rarely going on dates. In the years following my graduation from Kellogg, I walked down several roads trying to figure out why God had been so persistent about getting an MBA. First, I applied to a job on the West Coast. Then I explored what it might look like to be an entrepreneur with 2 different startup ideas. Each time I felt like the Lord was in it, opening doors and making things happen. And each time it felt like the bottom dropped out on me as soon as things started to get interesting. By the winter of 2016, I began to pray over what it might look like to move to Kyrgyzstan to do business as missions. I figured if I was bound to be single forever, I might as well be in Kyrgyzstan serving the Lord. For 6 months, I prayed over the opportunity and finally was so interested I planned a visit for late April. As you might imagine, my parents, well, most of you here really, were devastated at the idea of me moving halfway around the world. In a last attempt to knock some sense into me, Mom had one of her token mom conversations with me in early April. You know the kind. It starts with an innocent question empathizing with what you're going through, but then the questions get more pointed until you realize what she wants you to figure out for yourself. The questions were things like, do you think you'll meet a guy in Kyrgyzstan? Do you still want to have children? Do you imagine being a stay-at-home mom? Finally, I exploded in frustration. Mom, I'm 29 and single. I may never get married, and until I do, I've killed off all dreams of being a mother. God doesn't owe me a husband, so I might as well make the most of my singleness. I don't think I was wrong. I think I was just underestimating what God was capable of. Only a month after my explosive confession about dead dreams, Steve and I met for our first date. I had decided by then that I wasn't going to Kyrgyzstan, for now anyway, and that I was willing to give the long-distance dating thing a shot. And it's a good thing I did, because a year and a half later, that man is about to become my husband. In the midst of my singleness, I often thought of God as too busy to see me and my longings. I saw him as the eternal procrastinator. I figured one day he would wake up and think, shoot, Ashley needs a husband. I better see what I can scrounge up. A less than generous person might see Steve as what God was able to scrounge up for me. But hearing Steve's story and walking through this with him, I see Steve as an object lesson in God's faithfulness. I'm not sure how this is possible, but what Satan meant for evil, the brokenness Steve felt in the aftermath of his divorce, God has used to bless me abundantly. God has prepared for me a man that I didn't think existed. And now his amazing story of being shepherded by the Lord is my story too.
the story doesn't end there. He's still writing it in so many beautiful ways. The nice church lady is about to become my mother-in-law. She claims she wasn't trying to set us up, but I met the love of my life through her anyways. The road to Ashley wasn't all green pastures. Working through my past with her wasn't all still waters, but through it, the Lord has continued to restore our souls. I don't claim to have fully arrived. We're all still works in progress, but as the psalmist says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.